Whether it's rumination and activity monitoring or automated sort gates, your investment in technology is with a purpose. It's to save time, to save money, and improve overall performance of your dairy farming business. But what you didn't sign up for was spending more time just trying to figure out what all of the information means, or having to manually build a spreadsheet to make sense of data from different places, or trying to get your team on board to accept a change, trust the data, and then actually take action on it. If data has turned into the time-consuming monster that is stealing your focus, delaying your decisions, and dragging down your progress, you will want to keep listening, because I've got something important that could change the game for you right here today on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. This is the podcast for dairy farm owners, managers, and advisors who are committed to profitability, sustainability, and excellence. I'm your host, Peggy Coffeen, and it's my mission to bring you the conversations that will uplevel your skill set and your mindset, so you can be a top performer in the dairy farming business. And our guest today gets these challenges because he himself was a dairy manager in Texas for well over a decade, and he faced many of those same struggles. What he wanted was the right data at his fingertips, integrated in a way that would allow him to use it as a tool to actually improve performance and move his dairy forward. And so he created his own solution, what we know today as the Dairy Performance Network. Manny Salcedo founded DPN 7 years ago, and you are about to hear from Manny about how he came up with his own solution for slaying that time-consuming monster, and the story behind this customized software integration and data analytics system that connects people, cows, and technology, that has not only tied technologies together to give employees, managers, and owners the information they really want so they can actually save time and make informed decisions faster, but has also led to higher levels of employee engagement and helping dairies hit the benchmarks that really matter to their bottom line. And we'll leave you with a few tips on how to know when technologies are right for you and your dairy today in this conversation with DPN founder Manny Salcedo.
When you think back to your management years, what were the things that were some of the biggest challenges you faced when you were a manager?
Looking back at it 15, 16 years ago, we had a lot of technology on the dairy. You know, we had the herd management system, we had the feed software, we had the time clock, we had a bunch of different technologies that we had on the farm, but none of them talked, right? So a lot of my time, me and the other managers and the owners had to run around inputting information, grabbing information from different data sources. And then that same information had to then be copied into another system. And I felt like at the time that there has to be something that can just bring all this stuff together. Fine, we're going to have to input information to one system, but we should be able to capture all of the data and look at it on one single thing instead of having to use multiple things. So it was a big frustration for me because it was just a time-consuming monster for everybody involved, from people doing harvests, from the breeders entering data, from the hoof trimmers doing this or that. And then we had a lot of the cool technologies that exist today. So I got to play with sensor technologies, monitoring solutions. And one of the frustrations was I couldn't get the data out of it that I wanted to see to help the farm perform. As I got a little bit older and started working on web development, I started building tools to be able to retrieve that information to make it easier for our farm.
Okay. Wow. So I want to revisit a couple of things that you just touched on there, Manny, and your experience of being a manager. And it sounds like one of the greatest frustrations overall was you called it a time-consuming monster, right? When we think about adding technology to dairy, whether it was during your management career or any dairy that's looking at technology today, one of the big drivers is how can we save time? How can we save money? How can we be more efficient? And so as you were able to bring in technology, it sounds like one of the challenges you were bumping into was it wasn't necessarily saving time. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. It was costing us more time, actually, especially with some of the technology that was just put in place in its infancy. It just didn't have a lot of the bits and pieces that we needed for it to be streamlined.
One of the other frustrations you pointed out earlier when you were in the management seat yourself, and that was you couldn't easily grab the data that you wanted for decision making. So what were the decision making pieces of information that you knew were somewhere in this massive system that you just couldn't get a hold of fast enough? What were those key data points that you wanted that were so hard to grab?
For example, I wanted to get the information from the feed system, but also wanted to get the rumination data from the collar system, right? And I wanted to merge them together because I wanted to see if there was some tie-in with intakes versus rumination. And it was a challenge, but nowadays it's gotten a lot easier. And not only tying that into one thing, but then tying in a certain spreadsheet or tying in QuickBooks, for example, or tying in the CME market, right? And how do I bring all this data together instead of having to jump in between multiple systems?
Manny, when you were a manager, you had these frustrations with the time-consuming monster, with not being able to grab the data that you wanted to make decisions with. And so you mentioned that you started just playing around with building platforms. So help me connect the dots here. How does a dairy manager decide that he wants to create his own solution with software, which is a totally different industry, totally different skill set? What's the missing piece of the story that connects the two things together?
When I was a kid, back when I was still at the dairy, right, I was a big fan of web development. Back in the day, it was HTML and Flash, and so I always used to get my hands on web development, and so I loved making websites, blogs. This is before the era of YouTube and even Facebook, right? So I was always a big fan of web development. So I knew that I could take those skills possibly and try to retrieve this information. Well, about 10, 12 years ago is when the cloud started really coming to fruition. And as those technologies opened up, then it was easier to be able to grab information, put it into the cloud, and be able to do whatever you wanted with it. Back in the day, you basically had to store it on a local hard drive, and then most of the time, the data processing that it would take, these computers couldn't handle it. And so when the cloud opened up, then I was able to then grab basically whatever information I wanted, send it to the cloud, and then do and look at it however I wanted to look at it. So the cloud was a big piece of why some of the systems that exist today.
So you've always dabbled in this software space. Even as you grew into your role as a manager, you always gravitated back to just being interested in that area. And like you said, as the cloud system became available, like what light bulbs in your head started to go off where you could look at the problems that you were facing every day as a manager? Could you just see a solution in your mind that didn't exist at that time?
Yeah, it kind of opened the doors. So like I said, when I was a kid, I was making, like websites for different people or friends and stuff like that, right? I was always a big fan of cows, and I was a big fan of being a part of the dairy. And so I wanted to be able to grab some of the information that was there. Then I was like, okay, well, I can move certain pieces of information to this and then make basically a platform that would help the farm at the time.
So you created your own solution.
Yep.
And when you did that, what was possible for you as a manager? What opportunities did that open up for you to slay the time-consuming monster and have what you wanted available?
So once it was ready and we started using it on our dairy, it was just basically everybody had access to it, right? The managers, the employees, and what would take hours at a time during the day, it was now taking a few seconds. And I knew that was important, right? It was important to my dad, it was important to the other owners, it was important to the managers, it was important to the employees. And we live in a world where we want information quick, we want to make the decision, and then we want to move on. You don't want to spend all this time trying to figure out the information, because then you've got other things to do. And then as the dairy gets faster and faster in growth, people don't want to spend time digging through information. They just want it at their fingertips and they want to move on.
When you were able to create a solution for yourself, and as you said, it was something that was of high importance to you, to the employees, to other people that were part of the team, what was possible when you were able to actually take hours of time and compress it into seconds and have information available for you and the rest of the team?
I think it was the collaboration between all the people, right? So before, the KPI meetings came up every 6 weeks. It came up every 6 months. Now, the engagement from the employees was there. And so now that they're able to see on a computer or on a phone or on a tablet how they're performing, everything started moving in the right direction. So like to give you an idea, we started grabbing information like 0 to 15 seconds by shift, right? Or the percent milk in 2 minutes. And so every employee could then see, based on the position they were at the rotary, how they were each individually performing, right? So before we were producing, I don't remember the exact number at the time, but our flow rates got a lot quicker. So we were basically milking the cow out quicker based on the information of what the milkers were getting. And so they started getting competitive amongst themselves. And before you know it, we saw a drop in somatic cell. We saw more efficiency in the parlor. We saw less mastitis cows. And this is basically because these guys were all logged into the system that would show them how they were performing. And that was a huge benefit to the farm at the time.
It sounds like it created an atmosphere within the teams that led to increased performance overall, because people could see how their actions and their decisions that they're making every day actually had an impact.
Yeah, once you drive that culture up and engage these guys and know that they're being pretty much monitored, there's a sense of competition between themselves, and they only want to do better, right? A lot of farmers sometimes are hesitant to put some sort of technology that monitors employee compliance, but 9 times out of 10, usually that culture is built within themselves. Everybody likes to compete, right? And so once you get that in the culture of a farm, those guys tend to want to do better.
Would you say that was an unexpected benefit of what you were starting to uncover with being able to connect all these dots?
Yeah, it was definitely unexpected. I did not expect that. Just didn't think that it would be something that would become useful. But once I started grabbing the data and putting it in a way that they could see themselves, then it was just kind of game over after that. We just kept performing for years and years after.
So here you are, you're creating this application and you're seeing the potential. And so what was the moment when you're like, I should take this and start doing it for other people?
It was around 2017, and basically I told my dad, I was like, hey, I think this little thing could turn into something. I realized I was up against a challenge, right? Because it wasn't one of those things where I could just knock on the next dairy and say, hey, let me plug this into your USB and then everything's going to work, right? Everybody has different data points. Everybody has different technologies. And so I pretty much gave my 2-month notice and I left the farm. And then I just started knocking on doors. And before I know it, I picked up one farm and then started building it there for his dairy. And then it just kind of took off after that.
Just revisit that story. What was it like when you first got to that dairy? What was that dairyman's struggle?
Basically, one of the systems that he had was missing a bunch of cows, and it was in his heifer program, but it was missing some sync protocols they just weren't lined up on the days that they should have lined up. And he had been struggling with it for like about 8 months. Well, when I found the bug in the system, he was like, well, then, okay, I trust you now. Now you can be the guy that comes in here and fixes all this stuff for me.
You knocked on the right door of someone who had a problem and you were able to solve it. So he had struggled with that problem, as you said, for 7 to 8 months. How long did it take you to figure it out?
About, I don't know, a week.
So 7 to 8 months, 7 to 8 days. Man, I bet he was wishing he would have called you sooner.
He's a very progressive dairyman. He's always looking to better improve his herd. And so it was real easy for me it wasn't that easy. At first, he was very, very hesitant. And then once I was able to prove, like, hey, with technology and with these data points, if we're here now, we can take things to a different level. And time again, year after year, we've done that on his farm.
So how did you come up with the name Dairy Performance Network? Was it the one that you started with when you started knocking on doors?
To me, I wanted farms to perform better, and I wanted to create a network for them to bring all the data together. And that's how we came up with the name. Most of the people that we work with now, and even people in the dairy industry, call it DPN. Hardly anybody ever calls it Dairy Performance Network. The platform that we basically provide for these dairies, we call Dairy Stash. And so if you go to our website, you'll see that Dairy Performance Network has a tool called Dairy Stash, and Dairy Stash is basically what brings all the data together. But yeah, that's kind of how I came up with the name. We currently have about 6 people working for us now, These guys are either ex-dairy farmers like myself or computer guys like myself that either grew up on a dairy, were herdsmen on dairy, bred cows, and just happen to like the data space, like the technology side of things. And so, yeah, we're all working towards a common goal to help these farmers with their solutions. And like I said earlier, it's very difficult because every farm has different technologies, and as new startups come up, new technologies come up, there's not something out there that's just cookie cutter that you can plug in and brings everything together. So we have to take the time to understand what these technologies are and what the farmers want. And so when we're on farm and we're starting to build everything for them, there's a lot of going down from the guy bringing the cows up to the parlor, to the owner, to the manager, right? So we customize basically everything that the farmer wants, the owner wants, the manager wants, the herdsman wants, and the guy bringing up the cows, right? And so it's streamlining it and customizing it for what they want, down to the smallest detail. And so that's why our approach isn't just, hey, let's go in and essentially sell this thing. It's saying, okay, what are the problems that you have? And this is the solution that we have for you, right? And so we start building it from the ground up, basically.
And that means that you're alongside every person that's in that process of moving cows and getting them through the parlor and handling them on a daily basis, all the way up to those that are making decisions and looking at that information. Do you spend time kind of with every person in the process? Is that how you do it?
Yeah, on any given day, you'll see that my boots are covered in manure. At the end of the day, there's a little bit of computer time, and then once we start diving in and building everything that they want, there's computer time, and then there's time in the pens. Dairy's interesting. Dairy is a processing monster, right? So you have to understand like the workflows, and you can't necessarily do it from a computer. You have to really spend the time in the pen, seeing how everything moves, how cows move, how sort gates work, the timing of things. You have to understand what's important to them, right? If we're collecting feed data, right, what's important? Do they want to see start times? What time do they on average do they start? There's a lot of questions that come with collecting this data. And so it's important for us to have boots on the ground to understand all the processes on the dairy.
So you don't mind getting dirty to figure out what data is going to be most important. And that's your first step. Before building anything, you're doing a boots on the ground diagnosis.
We'll spend a lot of time, like I said, with the breeders, the hoof trimmers. It helps that I have the experience that I've done all of these things. And the guys that currently work with me now, they have the experience too, right? So we don't mind being behind a sort gate for 2 hours, training people. We don't mind setting up sort gates. We don't mind any of that stuff because we know how important it is. And time again, we run into situations where the technology isn't working for them. And so we try to fix that first and then move into the whole data space. It takes steps. If every dairy in the United States or wherever was all the same, then this wouldn't be a problem. But they're all very different. They're all very unique. From repro protocols to collars versus pedometers versus certain data points versus data points that they don't have. We deal with dairies that weigh cows every day. We deal with dairies that have rumination. We deal with dairies that don't do any of that but are on double off sinks, right? And so it's just every dairy is different, and to be able to understand the process is crucial before we ever get to building all of this data integration.
Think for a moment about a dairy that you and your team have really been able to get in and to help solve a problem. What problems was that particular producer facing or manager that they were stressed out about or losing time and losing money over? What's a recent story that comes to mind?
Basically, it was a dairy that had put in a collar system, sort gate system, and they were only getting 90% of the cows. So let's say they would send 100 cows to sort and only 90 would sort. And then the rest of the cows, they'd have to go find them in the pens. And so we went in there, made a few adjustments to the software, to the hardware, and had them up and running. Compliance is everything on dairies. And so if you are going to go find 100 cows, you better find the 100 cows, right? Because they're either a cow that's in heat or a cow that's sick or a cow that has some sort of issue with them or a vaccination protocol. So it's extremely important that they're compliant. And so that was one of the most recent things that we did for a farm is basically got their compliance up.
So what difference did that make?
They jumped up 5 points in heat detection because now we're sorting every cow that needs to be bred, and 5 points in heat detection goes a long way.
So that was an example of a dairy that had an issue with the technology just, being able to do what it said it was going to do. And in that case, it was a sort gate. What's another common scenario that you find yourself running into where there's a clear problem that's stressing out that manager and you're able to dig into it?
Most of the time, it's the people on the ground that are frustrated, right? You got to remember, kind of like me, we were guys out there in the pens, right, doing chalking, looking for cows ourselves. And usually when a new technology is brought in, it's usually the decision of the owner and the manager. But then we tend to forget the guys that are behind in the pens, right? And they're the ones that push back. And so to be able to flip that light switch and get that guy to say, hey, look, this system is not to replace you, but to make you better, is usually a big challenge on a lot of dairies. There's always a lot of pushback from the guy that's been heat detecting for 10 years, or the herdsman that, was finding sick cows and is going to be better than any system. But once you flip the switch on those guys, then you're off to the races.
How do you flip that switch?
Time and working with them, right? Being back there and saying, hey, look, this is the list of animals that the system is saying heat, and just helping them understand that it's only going to make them better. Once you do flip the switch and they see that they perform better. To give you an idea, there was this breeder that fought this thing for like 2 months. And I finally had a meeting with him, and I was like, listen, we're going to turn off you going into the pens, okay? Like, you're not going to go into the pens anymore. These cows are going to sort. They're going to come to you, and you're going to breed what's on the list. And I want you to do it for 2 months, right? Just 2 months. For 2 months, he did it. Once he saw his results, and this took time, right? Because obviously when you breed a cow, it takes a while. But after 2 months, he came back and he said, Manny, you're right. I don't have to go into the pens anymore. I've even gained 20 pounds because I'm not having to walk as much. He was happy, right? Once the farmer saw that he got his results, then we were good. But when it comes to technology, when it comes to all this data space that we're talking about, the culture of the people is extremely crucial.
So it sounds like in some cases, you almost end up coaching employees and team members through the adaptation to relying on technology.
Yep. Time and time again, we had to. And because again, we can make dashboards, but if we have poor performance, then that's important. The performance of the herd, the performance of the people is crucial to be able to monitor true KPIs and monitor all of this data that we are now looking at.
So as I'm listening to you just share these stories and these examples, Manny, of the challenges a dairy's facing when you come in and the way that you're able to help work through that, we have obvious challenges that you had talked about from the very beginning, the ones that drove you to create your own solution and go back to the time, right? The time it was taking to be able to manage and to figure out what to do with all of the data, being able to have what you actually needed at your fingertips. But if we were to really take a wider swing at the problems that a lot of dairies are facing as they adapt technology, it sounds like you've just uncovered a whole nother one. And that's that challenge of why isn't my team adopting this technology? Why aren't certain individuals on my team embracing it and allowing this to make their lives easier? Why is it that I've just invested so much money into being more efficient and more accurate and trying to make everybody's lives and jobs easier, but there's a pushback? Would you say that's a problem that you end up helping to solve as well?
Time and time again, we've been called in before they even purchase a system, basically for an audit. And we'll tell our dairy, hey, we walked with the breeders, we walked with the hoof trimmers, we walked with everybody. And if you drop this technology on them, I'm not sure if they're going to want to manage it. And it's a lot of money. When you're talking about these systems, it costs a lot of money. So I always tell people, hey, talk to your guys first. Talk to the cow pusher, right? There's all of a sudden you run into a situation where, hey, we're not going to lock up cows anymore. And, the farmer has this idea that the system's going to find all these sick cows. Well, then you run into an issue where all of a sudden the system doesn't catch lame cows anymore, right? And so we forget that we're not catching lame cows, and the managers and the herdsmen just quit looking for lame cows. And then before you know it, you've got a problem. A month and a half later, you've got a bunch of lame cows that they'll say, well, the system should have picked it up. Why didn't it pick it up? And so it's important that all of the players in the team know what's about to happen when it comes to buying technology. And so when we talk about ROI, like we tell dairies, hey, with these technologies, we can get you there in 9 months, we can pay it off. But if there's certain key players that aren't doing what essentially the system was put there for, that ROI can turn into 3, 4, 5 years, because the first 6 months is trying to get people to believe in it. Then after the 6 months is trying to get the results. So now you've just wasted a whole year on this technology, and you're like, man, that's a lot of money I just spent. And so it's changed over the last 4 or 5 years, but it still happens from time to time. These guys get a technology, and the people on the ground just weren't ready for it.
So you just mentioned that this is something you cover when you do an audit with the dairy, of just kind of seeing, are certain technologies going to be successful? Are they going to do what you want them to do? And it's not because the technology doesn't work. It's more along the acceptance, implementation, and application side. So if you could give dairy producers like 3 things that they should be considering, kind of the same things you look at when you're doing that audit, what would be the 3 things that should be top of mind and that they should be really thinking long and hard about in order to make a good decision that will get them the results that they want, of making investment that saves them time, saves them money, helps with employee performance, whatever the marks are that they're looking for? What would those 3 things be?
I would take a look at where you are at in performance-wise. Where are you currently at in terms of certain KPIs, right? How are we performing today? The next thing is, are my people going to accept this technology? Like, do I have the culture within my team to do tag management? Because it's a whole different monster once you put these tools in. Do I have the culture of these guys wanting to accept the technology? Am I going to have some pushback? And then the biggest thing is basically the ROI. What kind of impact will it have if I'm able to bring the other 2 things together?
Those are 3 really good, solid questions that a dairy owner, manager can be sitting down and asking themselves before we get to the point of signing a check and making an investment. So 10 years from now, what's DPN look like?
What the technology was even 4 years ago to where the technology is today, the bigger companies, the Amazons of the world, the Microsoft of the world, are making things easier for guys like us to be able to provide solutions for farmers. Mm-hmm. And so it's completely evolved. I think a year or 2 years from now, the biggest topic right now in the tech world is AI or machine learning. And I think even coming from our end, you're going to see a lot of that come through. We want to make things even more powerful with the data that we have. We want to take things to a whole different level in terms of using machine learning and AI to be able, for example, to be able to predict which animals should get Angus semen, which animals should get sex semen, which animals are going to be profitable, right? And so if we're able to build those algorithms within our platform, then it's going to really, I think it's going to take the dairy industry a step further ahead.
So when you're looking at the future of dairy and what you're able to do for dairy owners and managers, you're looking way outside of dairy. The biggest innovators in technology and data and artificial intelligence. And you're setting your sights on not what's currently available and in existence in dairy, but what is possible in this entire space that's so much bigger.
I think the future is there. I will say this, though. It's very important, even for me and my team, to keep our feet on the ground. Sometimes we can get, and this is me and every other company, right? We can kind of get carried away with our dreams, but we have to keep the solutions extremely simple, because at the end of the day, the laborer has to understand where we are at with technology, and we have to find a way to be able to transcribe that to them to where they can understand what's happening, right? And I think sometimes we tend to use these big words like AI and machine learning, but what it basically is, to give you an idea, I think we're at the point in time now where one system will then tell the guy that's in front of the cow, hey, check this cow for mastitis, check this cow for a digestive issue, check this cow for ketosis. And so to be able to just merge some of those systems together to where when that guy checks that cow in the palm of his hand, it tells him what to do. That's where I think some of this machine learning and stuff will come into play. But we have to be very careful, because sometimes when we talk about AI and machine learning, it's sometimes in the media it's played out to be what it's really not. But at the end of the day, it's basically algorithms that'll help people make a better decision quicker with the data that's provided.
Perhaps there's a problem that we've talked about today that folks out there are raising their hand saying, oh my gosh, that is my life. How can they connect with you, with DPN?
So they can reach out to our Facebook, our Instagram. If you go to Dairy Performance Network on LinkedIn, you can also email support@dpnconnect.com. Basically, if you go to our website, dpnconnect.com or dairyperformancenetwork.com, you'll be able to contact us right there.
Fantastic. And we'll include all of that as well as a contact phone number in the show notes.
You just heard from Manny Salcedo, founder of Texas-based DPN, the Dairy Performance Network, a dairy manager who made his own solution for slaying that time-consuming monster and has turned that into a service to do the same for you too. If your technology and data is overwhelming you right now, perhaps DPN could provide a solution to you as well. So thank you for listening to this conversation today. I'm Peggy Coffeen from the Uplevel Dairy Podcast.